Hello you lovely lot, my name is Max and welcome back to my YouTube channel and another Nottingham Forest match preview. Today we are discussing our upcoming away trip down to London to take on Antonio Conte's Tottenham. If you're new around these parts, these videos go as following. We start by providing some context to the season thus far for opposition. We then talk a bit more in depth about the stats, their underlying numbers in their attack and their defence, followed by a deep dive into their tactics and how we should set up to try and beat that side, and then eventually a score line prediction. So if you do enjoy this kind of content, don't forget to drop a like on this video, subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell so you don't miss a single video. With that being said, let's start talking about Spurs. So as we usually do, we'll start things off by providing some context for the season thus far for Spurs. And despite the fact that they sit 4th in the Premier League table at the time of recording, you can't really call this season anything other than a failure, failing to win a trophy for a 15th straight season after going out the Champions League this week to Milan. And in general, it feels like more of the same from Spurs. Good in attack with Harry Kane, close to getting 20 goals for yet another Premier League season, but just so frail and exposed defensively and looking so short on confidence, particularly during the last few weeks with Antonio Conte. Of course, it's heavily rumoured that Conte might be leaving in the summer. His contract, I believe, ends in the summer, and there's been a lot of clamour to bring back Mauricio Pochettino as the manager, and that would definitely be a completely 180 in styles from what Conte wants to play with this Spurs team to what they'll play under Poch. It'll be interesting to see what happens, but it definitely looks like a period of change and transition yet again for Spurs. And I feel like looking at the form table of the last 5 games is a really good indicator to how weird this season's been for Spurs. They've won 3 and lost 2 of their last 5 league games, which includes big wins against top 6 rivals Manchester City and Chelsea, but heavy defeats to the likes of Leicester and Wolves, who are struggling at the bottom end of the Premier League table at the moment. One game that they seemingly didn't struggle in earlier this season was a 2-0 win at the City Ground back in August. Yes, they won that game 2-0 thanks to a Harry Kane double, Spurs creating some really high quality opportunities of expected goals, ruling the game to be 2.4 to 0.8 in their favour, with only Manchester City having generated more expected goals at the City Ground against us this season. And this is despite the fact that Spurs only actually marginally outshot us 18 to 17, and we actually completed more passes within 20 yards of goal compared to the Lily Whites, really showing that Spurs were very ruthless on the day, making the most of the chances that they did get. So now we have some context on the season thus far for Spurs. I want to flip things over and start taking a look at their numbers in a little bit more detail. So at the moment, Spurs are the team who have taken the 4th most shots in the Premier League and scored the 4th most goals, which is pretty decent if you're a side chasing the Champions League. Where they fall off slightly is the fact that they've only generated the 7th most expected goals over the course of the season. Now, of course, when you have Harry Kane fit and firing netting 20 goals a season pretty consistently, you don't really have to worry about generating too much expected goals because you can back him to finish more or less anything. But when he's not having a good day, when he's not having a good day at the office, you really need to rely on the other players in your team. Or when you're not generating these high quality opportunities, you can really struggle to sort of get past more easy teams. And of course, diving even deeper, you can see the Spurs have scored 12 of their goals from set pieces this season, the most in the Premier League thus far this campaign, suggesting that yes, they'll be very good from set pieces, something that we're not very good at this season. And Dejan Kulusevski is actually the only player in their squad creating more than 2 chances per 90 minutes. Essentially, as we will probably discuss later, Spurs are so reliant on Kane's finishing and to a lesser extent his creativity, as well as the creativity of Dejan Kulusevski. They're a side that can almost look one-dimensional at times, very reliant on individual players, and when those players don't turn up, Spurs as a side don't really get much done. And I think the biggest worry with that is Dejan Kulusevski. He's only played 50% of the available minutes in the Premier League thus far this campaign, and when you're so reliant on his creativity, again, the guy's creating the most chances per 90 minutes in your squad, and he can only play 50% of the matches because of his fitness, you really need to consider investing in some more creativity in that side. Now, when we flip things over, Tottenham's defence is certainly something. It is definitely worth taking a look at. 36 goals is the 8th worst tally in the Premier League at the time of recording, whilst they have conceded the 6th most shots in the Premier League over the course of this season. But I'll caveat that by saying we're going to discuss that in a little bit more detail later on. The fact that they concede a lot of shots I don't think is too indicative to how poor they have been as a side. And when we flip things over and look at their expected goals, they actually have the 6th best defence according to expected goals. So expected goals tally against is the 6th best in the Premier League. Now, why is this? A big part of it, I would imagine, is down to their goalkeeper and the terminal decline of Hugo Lloris, who has been injured recently and then replaced by Fraser Forster in recent games, both of whom are north of 30 years old and not exactly the top quality goalkeepers that they once were. Here's a fun fact for you. Fraser Forster has played 33 games in his last 5 Premier League seasons combined. Now, to be fair to Lloris, his save percentage of 70% is pretty much bang average in the Premier League this season, higher than the likes of Ederson and David De Gea amongst top 6 rivals Manchester City and Manchester United. But when you consider just how many shots Spurs faced and generally the low quality of the shots that they do face, I would be expecting my goalkeeper, especially a top 6 side challenging for the Champions League season on season, to be one of the best in the Premier League in terms of shot stopping. And when you look into the finer details, for example, expected goals prevented, which is a little bit of an iffy stat, I wouldn't read too much into it. Hugo Lloris has prevented -3 goals in the Premier League this season, with his post-shot expected goals of -2.3, the 8th worst in the division of 31 keepers to have played in the Premier League this year. And when you combine that with the fact that he's playing behind a defence that's committed the 3rd most errors leading to shots in the Premier League this season, and the fact that Hugo Lloris has committed 4 errors leading to goals, the most in the Premier League this season, it is little wonder why Spurs fans are clamouring for a major overhaul of that defensive unit in the summer, especially if they're going to end up playing that expansive football they were playing under Poch for a few years. And to be fair, if I'm looking at defence, Romero is probably the only player I'm keeping out of that goalkeeper and back 3 system. Speaking of which, I think now is probably a good time for us to take a look at this Spurs system in a little bit more detail and what we can expect on the day from Antonio Conte's side. So of course, on paper, we all know what to expect from Antonio Conte. The man loves 3 at the back systems more than he loves an overpriced wing back. The 3-4-3 has been the preferred shape for Tottenham Hotspur this season. Lots of width from the fullbacks Kulusevski and Son playing inside as interior wingers, and of course the main man Harry Kane up front. However, where I want to start things off is in the defence. Defensively, Spurs sit back in a 5-4-1 low block, and they absolutely love to congest the box. As you can see on screen, we've got 8, 9, 10 players in the box looking to defend deep and really congest the 18-yard box. And of course, as we've discussed on this channel many times, defending in these deep positions really forces the ball into these wider areas where of course teams are less threatening. And of course, this comes back to what we were discussing earlier. Spurs have conceded the 6th most shots in the Premier League this season. And a big part of this is the fact that they concede these really low quality, far from goal opportunities. They are the team who concede on average shots from the 2nd furthest distance from goal in the Premier League this season. They're fantastic at stifling teams at their best to shots and restricting them from shots from these sort of very deep, far out from goal positions. In fact, I'm going to flash up on screen the shot map from their 2-0 win at the City Ground earlier this season, and what you'll see is their shots being of these really high quality opportunities through breaking really quickly and effectively, and our shots generally being of inferior quality. Lots of really small dots on that map, lots of really low quality opportunities. And just to note on that match at the City Ground, a lot of people said it was pretty even, and generally it was pretty even when you take a look at the numbers, but Spurs were fantastic. They were really ruthless at creating and finishing these really high quality opportunities whilst doing a really good job at restricting us to quite low quality opportunities on the flip side. And this leans really nicely into their strategy when they break out. They look to get lots of width in this side from their fullbacks, breaking forward and of course stretching teams as much as possible. And of course that front three of Harry Kane, Dejan Kulusevski and Heung-min Son. Kane of course dropping into these pockets where he can receive the ball, turn and look for these balls over the top to the likes of Son. Kulusevski is really good at getting into these wide positions, really good crosser of the ball, cutting in on that left foot. And ideally I would imagine their full-back or wing-back pairing would be Ivan Perisic down the left-hand side and Pedro Porro, who's recently arrived from Sporting in Portugal, down the right-hand side. 2 really effective, creative wing-backs. Porro in particular, defensively isn't the best, but attacking-wise you're going to get a lot of product in the final third from him. But I think this really nicely leads into the biggest issues for Spurs in attack, and that's the fact that they're just really predictable as a side. They're a side who don't have a lot of creativity outside of one or two players. Kulusevski, of course, is the main creative threat. We discussed him earlier. His fitness, though, has been such a big issue for them that they've been forced to play the likes of Richarlison, Lucas Moura. They brought in Arnold Juma in the transfer window during January, neither of which are particularly creative players. And if you can effectively shuttle Kulusevski onto his right foot and keep him in these wide areas, prevent him from cutting inside and getting these dangerous opportunities, you're really going to limit him and stifle him in terms of the creativity that he can produce. So it's going to be a really big opportunity for Renan Lodi to really cut down on Dejan Kulusevski and prevent him from being this effective, potent creator. And outside of Kulusevski, you've got Harry Kane, who really does his best creativity in transition when he's receiving the ball and looking to get the ball over the top. You've got Perisic and Porro, who will maintain the width and will cross a lot. Spurs, I think, have completed the 5th most crosses in the Premier League this season, and of course crossing is quite a big part of the game. But if you can defend the crosses that they offer you, if you are good enough in the air, good enough compact defensive block to prevent teams from crossing against you, Spurs are very limited creatively. They don't have any creativity in the midfield, especially with the injury to Rodrigo Bentancur. It leaves you with Højbjerg, who's a good runner but not a massively creative player, Oliver Skipp, who's young and more of a screening sort of presence. The centre-backs might sometimes come up and try and offer width and overlapping, particularly Romero on the right-hand side, but again, isn't a massively creative presence in wide areas. So it leaves this Spurs team very much seeking to make the most of what is quite limited creativity across the team and very much focusing on Kulusevski. And if you can keep him and Kane quiet, which is quite a big task, but if you can do it, you're going to really stifle the Spurs team. So in terms of the approach, I'd probably be looking at doing something similar to what we did against Manchester City. We played Brennan Johnson and Morgan Gibbs-White as our two sort of auxiliary forwards, I guess, and then a quite flat midfield 4 in front of a quite flat back 4, looking to be really compact and prevent the team from playing through us. And I think if we can do that, if we can sit back into a really nice defensive block and really prevent teams from playing through us and really make the most of the width and the pace that we have in these advanced positions, we could really cause this Spurs side some damage. It's a big effort. It's going to be a quite tough game, quite a physical battle, particularly in these midfield areas. But I think if we can keep the likes of Kulusevski and Kane quiet, if we can defend in this deep block and really sort of prevent the team from playing through us and force them into these wide positions where they're very reliant on individual players, I think we could do quite a good job. So yeah, that was really what I wanted to talk about with Forest. I want to see us be a little bit more defensive in this game, not be as open as we were against Everton, look to really compress the space, prevent the team from playing through us. It might involve us playing quite negatively, and I've talked to a few people on Twitter like, oh no, I want to see us really get at the Spurs side, but if you force Spurs to sit on the ball, they're not the most creative side. They want to be transitioning, they want to be playing through the lines as quickly as possible, and they simply can't do that when they have the ball for large extended periods of the game. And that's why I think we should play maybe a bit more of a negative defensive style to overall make the most of this opportunity to get something at the new White Hart Lane. So in terms of a scoreline for our game against Spurs, I'm going to go for a 1-1 draw. I do believe, I feel like I've said this quite a few times this season, but in terms of the schedule, this is the best time to be playing them. They're completely down in the dumps. They've just been knocked out of the Champions League. They've just been knocked out of the FA Cup by a Championship side. Their hunt for a trophy is over. Their season is pretty much over, other than qualifying for the Champions League come May. And really, I think they've got not much left to play for. Conte mentally seems like he's checked out. A few of the players seem like they've mentally checked out as well. And like I say, I think this is a great opportunity for us to nick something and take something back to the City Ground for a huge match against Newcastle in the coming weeks. So I'm going to go for a 1-1 draw. Like I say, I think we will nick something, but it's going to be a very tight match. Of course, though, let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below, what your scoreline predictions are for our away trip down to White Hart Lane to take on Tottenham. And whilst you're down there, don't forget to drop a like on this video, subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell so you don't miss a single match preview and a couple of different kinds of videos I've got planned for the next few weeks. With that being said, though, enjoy the game if you're going down there. It's a long trek. Hopefully we get something decent for us to take back to the City Ground. With that being said, though, I will catch you later.